I remember the way the cold felt on my face that Christmas Eve, the kind of sharp winter air that bites through your coat no matter how tightly you pull it closed. I was standing on the front porch of my parents' house in Bend, Oregon, listening to the muffled laughter and clinking dishes coming from inside. Well, snow fell in slow, bright flakes under the porch light. Before I even knocked, I could feel something sitting wrong in my chest. If you are listening to this right now, I am curious where you are and what you are doing. When everything happened to me that night, I was standing on that porch taking a deep breath and trying to gather myself. I thought if I could just tell my truth, maybe things would be different. I had spent the entire drive rehearsing the words in my head. I was 30 years old, working part-time at a small clinic, and studying online to earn my full certification. I never had the savings to rent a place of my own because the deposit for any apartment in Bend cost more than I could manage. So I stayed with my parents, telling myself it was temporary and that as soon as I finished school, I would move out. What they never knew was that I had an even bigger truth to share that night. I was 12 weeks pregnant. I lifted my hand to knock. Before my knuckles touched the wood, the door swung open. My dad stood there, his face stiff and flat, like he had been waiting for me. His voice came out sharp, no warmth at all. He told me I was not welcome at the Christmas dinner. Then he called my pregnancy, which he had guessed from the way my coat hung on me, an embarrassment to the family. He said I no longer belonged in his home. He said I had shamed his name and his church, and that I needed to leave right then. The door slammed shut so hard, the wreath rattled. I stood there, staring at the wood grain, inches from my face, my breath caught in my throat. Behind the door, I heard the scrape of his boot on the floor, and then another noise, the sound of a deadbolt turning. They had locked it. My own parents had locked it. I took a small step back. Through the window, I could see my mom standing behind him. Her hands were clasped together like she did not know what to do with them. She could not meet my eyes. She looked down at the floor, then away, then disappeared into the kitchen where the soft yellow lights flickered over. Holiday dishes and the smell of roasted ham drifted out the door jamb. My cousin sat around the table, pretending not to watch. An entire room full of people I had known all my life, and every last one of them avoided my gaze. My hand instinctively moved to my stomach. A cramp flickered across my lower belly, a tiny twist of pain from stress. The cold wind gusted across the porch, and I felt myself shiver. It was Christmas Eve. People were laughing behind the door, passing bowls of mashed potatoes, lifting glasses of sparkling cider, and I was standing alone outside the house I had grown up in, with nowhere else to go. I walked down the steps slowly, almost as if my legs did not belong to me. Snow gathered in clumps on the sleeves of my coat. The lights along the gutter flashed red and green. Somewhere down the street, a kid was shouting with excitement, probably running to show a new toy to a neighbor. Everything looked like the picture-perfect holiday you see in magazines. People gathering around fireplaces, children opening gifts, families sharing meals. Except for me. I was being pushed out into the street by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. When I reached my car, I sat inside with the engine off and cried so hard my chest hurt. I wiped my face over and over with my sleeve, but the tears would not stop. I kept thinking about the moment I told myself all day would happen, the moment I would sit my parents down and say, I am pregnant. I thought maybe they would be shocked at first, maybe even upset, but I truly believed they would calm down and find their way back to me. Instead, all I got was a slammed door and a locked deadbolt. I turned the key in the ignition, the old engine coughing to life. I did not have a place to stay. I had no apartment, no friend in town who was home for the holidays, no sibling I could go to because my older sister lived 2 towns away with her own family. And I knew I could not stay parked on the street in front of my parents' house. If my dad saw my car sitting there, he would call someone to have it moved. That was the kind of man he was. I drove through the snowy streets with no destination in mind. Every motel sign I passed glowed dimly through the storm. I finally pulled into the parking lot of a small roadside place that looked about as tired as I felt. Half the letters on the sign were burnt out. The pavement was cracked under the snow, but there was a light on and an open sign in the window. That was all I needed. Inside, the front desk clerk handed me a key to a room on the 2nd floor. I climbed the stairs slowly, gripping the rail to steady my shaking legs. The hallway smelled like old carpet and something fried. The room was small but quiet. A faded quilt covered the bed. There was a small desk and a single lamp. I switched it on, sat down on the edge of the mattress, and let myself breathe. A few minutes later, my phone vibrated. It was my sister, Rachel. The message was short. She said she was sorry and wished she could have done something. She said she had seen the entire scene from the dining room and froze because she knew if she interfered, my dad would have thrown her out too, and her kids needed a roof over their heads. I stared at the screen for a long moment before setting the phone down beside me. Outside the window, the snowfall grew thicker. Cars passing on the highway left long streaks of light in the night. I sat there in the dim motel light, holding my abdomen gently with both hands, and wondered how everything in my life had shifted in 1 hour. I had walked toward my parents' porch with hope. I had walked away with nothing but fear and a child growing inside me. If you have ever been turned away by the people who were supposed to protect, you know the kind of emptiness that takes over. It feels like standing in the dark, listening to a door lock behind you. I did not know then that the night was only the beginning, and that much bigger. Storms were waiting for me. The next morning would bring news I never saw coming, but all I could do in that moment was pull the motel blanket around myself, shoulders, and try to survive the cold pressing in from every side. The cold kept pushing through the thin motel walls that night, and by the time the gray light of morning crept in around the curtains, I had barely slept. I sat up slowly, pulled a stiff motel blanket off my legs and trying to steady my breathing. My body felt heavy from everything that had happened, but there was no one to lean on. No one to tell me what to do next. I swung my feet onto the carpet, which felt damp even though it looked dry, and I tried to convince myself that I could handle one more day on my own. I opened the door and stepped out into the walkway. Fresh snow had settled along the railings and across the parking lot. The air smelled like wet pine and chimney smoke drifting from houses in the day. Distance. For a moment, I just stood there with my hands stuffed in the pockets of my coat, watching my breath curl in front of me. The motel owner, an older woman named Doris Wells, was sweeping the walkway with slow, determined strokes. She was small and hunched, wearing a faded pink coat and boots that looked older than me. She glanced up. "Morning. Did you sleep all right?" I nodded, though we both knew it was a lie. She looked over me for a second longer than usual, like she already knew my story without asking. People in small towns always seem to sense things like that before you were, ready to say them out loud. She went back to sweeping. "Folks have been talking," she said in a low voice. The words floated out on a cloud of cold air. "I heard some things about your dad last night. Something happened over on Maple Ridge Drive. Something about him turning his own daughter out on Christmas Eve." I froze. Of course, gossip had already spread. News traveled faster than the snowplows in Bend. I swallowed and forced a small nod, but I did not give her details. Doris only tightened her lips and shook her head. That man ought to be ashamed. A grown woman, expecting a child, was thrown into the cold like that. "I just hope you are all right." I thanked her and walked back into my room. The door shut behind me with a tired thump. I sat down at the small desk, trying to shake off the ache that had settled between my ribs. It was not just what happened last night. It was years of living under the shadow of a man who cared more about appearances than the people standing right in front of him. Growing up, every mistake in our house was treated like a stain on the family name. If I spoke too loudly at church, my dad said I embarrassed him. If I got a B in school, he told people I was unfocused. When I forgot to put my shoes away once, he lectured me for 30 minutes about responsibility. I used to think every family was like that every kid held their breath, waiting to see if their dad was in a good mood that day. It took me until my 20s to realize that some parents actually hugged their kids when they messed up, instead of scolding them. I had wanted to move out so many times. Between the ages of 20 and 29, I must have stared at 100. Apartment listings. The cheapest places still wanted 2 or 3 months of rent up front, and my job at the clinic paid $19 an hour. Every time I tried to save, something came up. My car needed repairs. My school fees were due. Groceries cost more. And my parents kept saying, Why rush to move out when you can stay home and focus on your studies? They always found a friendly way to keep me right where they wanted me, under their roof, under their rules, under their judgment. Just then my phone buzzed. I picked it up, hoping it would be my sister, but it was an unknown number with no name, just a message that made my stomach twist. "We are praying for you." I stared at the screen. It was exactly the kind of vague, sanctimonious message the church ladies sent whenever they wanted to pretend they were helping while still spreading gossip behind your back. My throat tightened. The idea that they knew about last night made me feel like my life was being held up on display for everyone except the people who mattered. A knock rattled the door. I walked over cautiously. Doris stood there holding a small paper cup. "I figured you might need something warm. Hot cocoa. Nothing fancy, but it takes the edge off." I thanked her and took the cup. The steam fogged up my glasses as I brought it close to my face. She lingered in the doorway. "Honey, people around here talk too much. They talk about things they don't understand. But I want you to know you can stay as long as you need to. Your dad's behavior is his problem, not yours." Her kindness hit me harder than I expected. My eyes stung, but I blinked fast and kept myself steady. I told her I appreciated it. Doris gave me one last nod before heading back down the hallway. I closed the door and sat on the edge of the bed again, holding the warm cup between my hands. For a second, the heat grounded me. My mind drifted back to Rachel. A few years earlier, she had wanted to leave her first marriage. She came home one night with bruised eyes from crying and told our parents she was done. My dad did not ask if she was safe or hurting. He asked what the church would think. He said divorce made the family look unstable. He told her she needed to stay married to protect the family reputation. When she insisted she wanted out, he threatened to kick her out with nothing but the clothes on her back. Only my mom stepping in kept him from doing it. And even then, Rachel stayed with that man far longer than she should have because of the pressure from our dad. Thinking about that made my chest feel tight. It was a pattern. The anger, the control, the way he treated women in our family like responsibilities instead of people. I was not the first to be cornered. I was just the first to be carrying a child when it happened. My phone buzzed again. I flinched before I looked. Another unknown message. This one was longer, but just as unsettling. We heard what happened. "The Lord will guide you through your choices." I pressed the end button hard and set the phone down face first. I leaned back on my hands and stared at the cracked ceiling. This was only the beginning. If the church already knew, David would be on a mission to spin whatever story made him look like the victim. That was how he operated. Outside, I heard the sound of a snow shovel scraping along the walkway. A car door slammed somewhere in the lot. A dog barked in one of the neighboring rooms. Life kept moving in that quiet little motel, even as mine felt like it had been frozen in place. I stood up and pulled the curtains aside. Snow drifted in slow circles under the streetlights. A couple walked past my window, holding hands, bundled up in thick coats. Something about the sight made my throat tighten again. They looked warm. They looked like they belonged somewhere. I pressed my hand against the glass, letting the cold seep into my palm. This room was not home. It was not even close, but it was the only place I had left. I took a few slow breaths and stepped back. I needed to figure out my next move, but the truth was, I did not have one. Not yet. For now, all I could do was sit in that small, quiet room while the world outside filled with whispers bearing my name. The world outside my motel window kept moving with its steady rhythm. Cars passing in the distance, and snow melting into thin gray slush along the curb. But inside the room, I felt stuck in a loop of thoughts I had been trying to avoid. I sat back down on the edge of the bed, letting my hands fall onto my thighs. And for the first time since that awful night on my parents' porch, my mind drifted to Noah Bradford. It surprised me how quickly his name came to me, like it had been waiting just underneath the noise of everything else. I had managed to push thoughts of him aside for days, maybe weeks, pretending I had built enough distance. But the truth was, I had never really let go of him, even after we ended things. My heart tightened with a mix of longing and shame as I thought of the last time we spoke face to face. We met a little more than a year earlier at a home improvement store where I had gone to buy paint samples for the room I had been planning to fix up at my parents' house. He was standing in the lumber aisle talking to an older coworker, and I remember hearing his laugh before I saw his face. There was something warm about him, something steady. When he finally noticed me staring at paint chips like they held the meaning of life, he walked over and asked if I needed help. I ended up leaving with 3 colors I did not need and his phone number, written on a scrap of receipt paper. For months, everything between us felt easy. He worked as a construction engineer, tall and thoughtful, with hands rough from long days on job sites. He liked simple things: early mornings, strong coffee, and local baseball games. We did not fight often, and when we did, we made up easily. It was the kind of relationship that felt like it could grow into something real. But somewhere along the way, the ground started to shift underneath us. He had been offered a position, a job that could mean real advancement for him. When he told me about it, I smiled and congratulated him, but inside, I felt something sink. I had lived in Bend my whole life. My work was here. My school was here, and despite how complicated my home life was, I was not ready to abandon everything I knew. We tried to talk about it more than once. Every time the conversation ended with both of us feeling bruised. I remember sitting at his kitchen table one night, late enough that the streetlights outside had turned the windows into dark mirrors. He was pacing back and forth in front of the stove, running his fingers through his hair the way he did when he was frustrated. He said he felt torn. He said he wanted to take the job, but he also wanted to be with me. Then he said the one sentence that carved its way into me so sharply I could still hear it even now. He said he did not want to be tied down. He meant the job, the pressure, the uncertainty of the future. But in that moment, I heard nothing except that he did not want to be tied to me. After that, I felt myself pull away. I became careful with what I shared. I ignored the small changes in my body that I should have noticed sooner. And when I finally learned I was pregnant, I did not know how to tell him without feeling like I was forcing something he did not want. We broke up 2 weeks later. It was not a dramatic fight. No yelling. No slammed doors. We just sat in his truck outside my parents' house, the windows fogging from our breath, and quietly agreed that we were not on the same path. I remember walking to the front door with my coat zipped up to my chin and telling myself it was for the best. I told myself I would be fine, but a small part of me kept waiting for him to call and ask if I was all right. He never did, and when I found myself staring at that pregnancy test alone in my bathroom, I knew deep down that I could not risk hearing him say again that he did not want to be tied down. So I kept the secret. I hid my fear. I told no one except Rachel after she came to visit one afternoon. I thought if I waited long enough, I could figure things out on my own. I leaned forward now, elbows on my knees, trying to breathe through the ache in my chest. Maybe it was foolish to think about him. Maybe it was wrong to wonder if things could have been different. But a part of me still remembered the way he looked at me when he was trying to make me laugh. How he lifted me up during the early days of our relationship. How kind he was when he was not wrestling with his own ambitions. My phone buzzed again on the bed. I jumped at the sound. I reached for it quickly, half expecting another message from some church group or a neighbor who had heard rumors. Instead, the screen showed several missed calls from a number I did not recognize. The area code was from Redmond, Oregon. My breath caught. Redmond was where Noah lived. A chill moved up my back as I stared at the call log. 3 missed calls, all from the same number, all placed within the last hour. I felt something shift inside me. It was not quite fear and not quite hope. It was something in between, something trembling and unsure, like standing on thin ice and waiting to see if it would hold. I let the phone rest in my palm while I tried to steady my breathing. If it was Noah, why would he call me now? How would he even know I was here? The last time I saw him, I told him I needed space, and he had respected that. It made no sense that he would suddenly be trying to reach me unless something had happened. Another vibration jolted the silence of the room. The same number flashed across the screen. I stared at it, frozen, unable to make myself swipe to answer. The ringing filled my ears. My pulse thudded in my throat. I felt like the walls were closing in around me. I let it ring until it stopped. I sat completely still, waiting for something else to happen. But the room was quiet again. The snow outside had slowed to a soft drizzle. The motel heater clicked on with a low groan. Somewhere down the hall, a door slammed and footsteps thudded across the walkway. I set the phone down gently and lay back on the bed, staring up at the ceiling. The cracks above me branched out like small rivers spreading across dry earth. I traced them with my eyes and tried to understand what this new twist meant. I was not ready to talk to him. I was not ready for any of this. Still, the missed calls from Redmond stayed on the screen, glowing in the dim light of the room, refusing to be ignored. I kept staring at those missed calls from Redmond until the screen finally dimmed and went dark. I pressed the phone against my chest for a moment, feeling the steady thump of my heart beneath it, then set it aside and forced myself to focus on the one thing I could control. I needed to take care of this baby. Whatever was happening with Noah could wait. Whatever was happening with my parents could wait. My next appointment was already scheduled, and I knew I could not skip it after everything that had happened. The clinic sat on the far edge of town, a small tan building with a slanted roof and a narrow parking lot half covered in slush. I drove slowly, gripping the wheel tight, my eyes heavy from lack of sleep. When I stepped inside, the familiar smell of hand sanitizer and warm printer ink washed over me. The waiting room was quiet. Just a young couple whispering to each other in the corner, and an older woman, flipping through a magazine. When the nurse called my name, I followed her down the hallway. Each step felt heavier than the last. She checked my blood pressure, asked if I had any new symptoms, and finally led me to the exam room where Dr. Keaton walked in with his gentle, calm voice. He was in his late 40s, with kind eyes and a warm way of speaking that made people feel safe. I told him about the cramping from stress. I did not tell him about the door slamming in my face, or the cold porch, or the motel. He listened closely anyway. He reminded me to rest as much as I could and avoid anything that made my first anxiety spike. He said babies knew when their mothers were under too much strain. His words were meant to soothe, but instead they weighed on me like stones. I knew I was barely holding myself together. When I stepped back outside into the cold, the sun was already low behind the trees. I drove slowly toward the motel, my thoughts running circles around each other. I wondered how someone like me was supposed to become a mother on her own. I wondered how I would find the strength, or the money, or the courage. I wondered how long I could keep my heart from breaking because of everything I had lost. My eyes stung, but I blinked the tears away and kept driving. When I reached the motel parking lot, I sat there a long time before getting out. My breath fogged the windshield. I rested my forehead against my hand, willing myself to move. When I finally stepped out of the car, snowflakes clung to my hair and eyelashes. I walked toward the stairs, dug my key out of my coat pocket, and opened the door to my room. The moment I stepped inside, my phone buzzed. A voicemail notification flashed across the screen. I pressed play, expecting another church message or someone digging for gossip, but the voice that came through was deeper, unfamiliar, and completely detached from anything I expected. Avery Collins, we need to speak with you. This is a family matter. My stomach dropped. I played it again. The voice was male, serious, with no hint of warmth. It did not sound like Noah. It did not sound like anyone from the Bradford family. The word family made my skin prickle. The way he said it made me think of my dad, the same cold tone he used when he wanted control over a situation. I shut the phone off for a moment and pressed both hands against my face. I paced the length of the small room, my shoes sinking into the worn carpet. Maybe my dad had sent someone to track me down. Maybe he wanted to force me into some kind of conversation, something he could twist into his own version of events. He had connections through church and through the auto repair shop he managed. It would not be impossible for him to find someone willing to meddle on his behalf. The fear crawled up my spine until I could barely breathe. I grabbed my coat again and headed straight back out the door. The cold wind hit me so hard my eyes watered. I drove to the nearest legal aid office on the other side of town. My hands were shaking by the time I walked inside. The waiting area was small, with brown vinyl chairs and a bulletin board, filled with flyers offering help with rents, custody questions, and domestic issues. After I filled out a form, a woman in her late 30s came out and introduced herself as Maggie Turner. She wore a soft gray sweater and had a calm, patient way of looking at me that made me feel seen for the first time in days. She invited me into her office and closed the door gently behind us. Her voice was steady when she said to tell her everything. And I did. I told her about the door slamming in my face, about being locked out, about having no place to go. I told her about the church messages and the anonymous voicemail. I told her about being pregnant and about how afraid I was that someone would try to use that against me. Maggie listened with her hands folded, nodding occasionally. When I finally stopped talking, she reassured me. She said I had every right to leave my parents' house if the environment was hostile or unsafe. She said being pregnant did not give anyone, including my dad, any legal say over my decisions or my body. She said if he tried to harass me, the police could be involved, and a protective order could be filed if necessary. Her words eased something inside me that I had been carrying since Christmas Eve. She made everything sound survivable. When I walked out of the office, the sky had turned a hazy blue. My breath fogged around me as I reached for my car door. I felt slightly steadier, but still raw. Back at the motel, I set my purse on the bed and turned on the lamp. The room glowed in soft yellow light. My phone buzzed again. Another voicemail. My heart thumped against my ribs. I stared at the screen for a moment before pressing play. Avery. It is Noah. Please pick up. The sound of his voice filled the room and hit me like a wave. I sank down onto the edge of the bed, gripping the phone in my hand. The voicemail ended, leaving a quiet so deep it felt like the air itself was holding its breath. I sat there with the phone in my lap, my thoughts spinning, unsure of what his voice meant or what would happen next. I sat frozen on the edge of the bed, my phone still warm in my hand from the sound of Noah's voice filling the room. Only moments earlier, I did not move. I did not breathe. I just stared at the wall, as if something there could tell me what to do next. The quiet inside that small motel room felt sharper than the cold wind outside. I kept replaying his voice in my mind, soft and strained, almost pleading. It had been months since I heard it last, months since I tried to stitch myself back together after we ended things. Now he was reaching across a distance I never expected him to cross. Before I could gather my thoughts, the phone buzzed again. I flinched. It was not Noah this time. The screen lit up with a name I had not seen since Christmas Eve. Mom. I stared at the phone, my heartbeat climbing fast. She had not called me once. Not when I left the house in tears. Not when I ended up at a cheap motel all alone. Not when the church whispers started. And now, suddenly, her name was lighting up my screen like an alarm. I answered slowly, barely able to get the word hello out of my mouth. Avery. Her voice trembled, but not in the way I hoped. There was no softness, no apology, just something tight and breathless. You need to come home. Right now. It is urgent. I sat up straighter. What is going on? Just come home, please. Her words rushed out fast, but nothing about them sounded motherly or comforting. It felt like she was speaking from a place of panic, but not the kind of panic a mom has when she is worried about her child. It was something else, something she did not want to say out loud. Mom, why? Did something happen? Silence for 2 seconds. Then I will explain when you get here. She hung up before I could answer. I stared at the dead screen, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Nothing about that call made sense. Mom never spoke like that unless someone was watching her, unless my dad was close enough to hear, unless she needed something she did not know how to ask for directly. I set the phone down, but it buzzed again almost immediately. This time it was a text from an unknown number. A short message. Avery, it is Noah. I am on my way to Bend. Please let me talk to you. My stomach twisted. He was coming here. Right now. Suddenly, every emotion I had pushed down over the last months rose up at once. Fear. Shock. Relief. Anger. A small flicker of hope I did not want to admit to. I pressed my hand against my belly, feeling a faint tightening from stress. I needed to understand how all of this started. The calls. The voicemail. Noah suddenly drives toward Bend. Mom begged me to come home. The more I thought about it, the more pieces began to rearrange themselves in my mind. It started with Jenna. Of course it did. A few days after I found out I was pregnant, I had broken down and told my closest friend, Jenna Brooks. She was the kind of friend who spoke her mind without hesitation, who loved fiercely, who would throw herself in front of a train for the people she cared about. When I told her about Noah, about the way things ended, about the baby, she looked at me with tears in her eyes and said I should not have had to carry that alone. She also said she was not going to sit quietly while the father of my child walked around thinking nothing had happened. I never asked her to call him. She never asked for permission. She tracked him down through an old contact who still worked with his construction crew. That was Jenna. If she cared about you, she acted. She told me later she left him a voicemail that was not exactly calm. She told him I was pregnant, alone, scared, sleeping in my childhood bedroom because I had no money to move out. She told him he had broken my heart and left me with the pieces. She told him he needed to face what he had done. What she did not know was that Noah had no idea. He had ended things because he felt torn between the job offer and our relationship, not because he wanted to abandon me. Hearing from Jenna must have hit him like a freight train. And then he called his mom. I could imagine the scene. Lydia Bradford sitting at her kitchen counter, the same blue-tiled one she used to bake pies on. Her son called her in distress, telling her he had hurt someone he cared about. Lydia was a gentle but firm woman, the kind who did not let problems float in the air. She faced them. And when Henry Bradford heard the same news, he probably put down whatever he was doing and told Lydia to pack the car. He was a man who believed in responsibility, in showing up, in fixing things. He had once told Noah that real men handled their mistakes with honesty, not excuses. I could picture all of it playing out in a home miles away. Decisions made quickly, with urgency, but without the kind of pressure I was used to growing up under. They were coming to talk to me. They were coming to help him fix what had been broken. But at that moment, I had no idea where they were going or how close they had come. I pushed myself to stand, feeling unease fill every part of me. My motel room felt too small, too quiet, too vulnerable. I walked to the window and pulled the curtain back slowly. Snow was falling again, soft and slow. The parking lot was emptier than the night before, only a couple of cars scattered near the stairs. But one vehicle stood out immediately, sitting near the end of the lot where streetlights cast a pale glow across its shiny surface. A black SUV, large, polished, newer than anything a local would normally drive on a night like this. It sat still, engine running, faint puffs of exhaust rising into the cold air. My throat tightened. My fingers clenched the curtain. I leaned closer to the glass, heart thudding. There was someone inside. A faint silhouette behind the windshield. I could not tell who it was. I could not see a face, or even the shape, clearly, but the sight of that SUV sent a rush of adrenaline through me. My first thought was Noah. My second thought was my dad sending someone to find me. My third thought was something I could not name, something crawling up my spine with cold urgency. I stepped back slowly, letting the curtain fall back into place. My breathing grew uneven. I stood there in the dim motel room, listening to the thrum of my pulse in my ears. Someone had come for me. I did not yet know if that was a good thing or a very bad thing. I did not move for a long moment. The black SUV stayed there in the parking lot, its engine running steady, exhaust drifting in the cold air like a quiet warning. I felt the tension coil so tight inside my chest that it hurt to breathe. Then the phone buzzed again. A message from Mom, short and frantic. "Avery, come home. Now." I stood there trembling, torn between fear and confusion. If that SUV belonged to Noah, why had he not called again? If it belonged to someone sent by my dad, why would Mom be begging me to come back? The pieces did not fit, and the only way to find out was to go back to the place I least wanted to return to. My keys jingled in my hand as I stepped out into the cold. The SUV did not move. No window rolled down, no door opened. It just sat there, humming low. I did not look back as I got into my car and pulled out of the lot. My headlights washed over the SUV for a split second, but the tinted windows kept everything hidden. The drive to my parents' home in Bend felt painfully long. The snow on the streets had turned into a messy slush that pulled at the tires. The closer I got, the tighter my stomach twisted. My dad had thrown me out on Christmas Eve, closing the door so hard the wreath fell crooked. That same door now stood at the end of the driveway, lit by warm porch lights, looking like something from another world. I parked along the curb and sat there for a second, gripping the wheel. My breath fogged in the cold air, and for a brief moment I thought about turning back. But I needed answers. I stepped out, pulled my coat tight, and walked up the icy path. The door swung open before I even knocked. Mom stood there smiling too big, her voice too bright, her eyes darting behind me. Avery, thank God. Come inside, sweetheart. Sweetheart. She had not called me that in years. The words scratched at old wounds instead of soothing them. I stepped inside, slowly. The warmth of the living room hit me all at once, almost suffocating. Everything looked exactly like it had on Christmas Eve. The same decorations, the same faint smell of cinnamon from a candle on the table. But there was something different in the air, something tight and artificial. Dad appeared from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel. His smile looked like it belonged to someone else. Avery, there you are. We have been worried sick. I froze. Worried. Sick. This from the man who slammed the door in my face while I was 12 weeks, pregnant, who left me outside in the snow with nowhere to go. The words felt like poison. I stepped farther into the living room and then stopped dead in my tracks. Two people were sitting on our couch. Henry Bradford, tall and broad-shouldered, gray at the temples, and beside him, Lydia, warm-eyed, calm, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Their expressions were gentle, polite, and quietly observant. They stood when they saw me. My heart slammed into my chest. They had beaten me here. I glanced at Mom. She had definitely invited them inside. She had given them the best seats in the living room. She had offered them drinks. She had switched into perfect host mode, the one she used for holiday gatherings and the church council members. Dad's posture shifted subtly, like he was trying to make himself look more impressive. His smile tightened. His voice took on a tone I had only ever heard when he wanted to look like a good father in front of people who mattered to him. Henry stepped forward first. Avery, it is good to meet you. I am sorry it is under stressful circumstances. His voice was steady and warm. Lydia gave me a small smile and a nod, like she was trying to let me know it was safe to breathe. I opened my mouth, but Dad jumped in before I could speak. We have all been very concerned. He placed a hand on my shoulder, the touch stiff and unnatural. Avery left unexpectedly, and there was some confusion. The timing was overwhelming for all of us. We are just trying to sort things out as a family. This whole situation has been a shock. Shock. Confusion. Overwhelming. He made it sound like I had run away in some dramatic fit, instead of being shoved out the door in the freezing cold. Henry looked between us, his brow tightening slightly. Avery, he said gently, are you all right? I nodded slowly, but inside everything was crumbling. Dad stepped in again, almost blocking me from answering properly. We just want what is best for her. She is our daughter. He forced out a dry laugh. Sometimes families argue, but we handle things together. Something inside me snapped. Handle things together. I felt heat rise up the back of my neck. My hands shook. I glanced at Mom, hoping for even a flicker of honesty, but she looked away quickly, pretending to straighten the napkins she had set out on the coffee table. I took a step forward, out from under Dad's hand. I am going to speak for myself. Dad's face tightened, but I did not stop. My voice came out steady, even though my heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. He did not handle anything with me. On Christmas Eve, my dad kicked me out of this house. He told me I was not part of this family anymore. He slammed the door in my face while I was standing outside in the snow, 12 weeks pregnant. He left me with nowhere to go. The room went silent. Henry stared at Dad like he was seeing him for the first time. His expression shifted in an instant, from polite curiosity to something sharper, disgust, maybe even anger. Lydia's lips parted quietly, her eyes softening as they moved back to me. Mom sat frozen in her chair, her hands clenched tight. Dad's face went pale. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. And in that small, tense living room, with the Christmas lights still glowing behind us like a lie, the truth finally landed like a stone dropped into still water. Henry Bradford looked at my dad with an expression so cold and clear that even the air in the room seemed to change. I had never seen a look like that aimed at my father before, and I knew this was only the beginning. Henry did not look away from my dad. His jaw was tight, his eyes sharp with something that felt like judgment and disbelief mixed together. The room held its breath, every person in it stiff and frozen. Then Henry raised one hand slightly, signaling all conversation to stop. His voice was steady when he spoke, but there was no softness left in it. Everyone stayed quiet for a moment. My dad swallowed hard, his face twitching. Mom sat rigid on the couch, staring at the rug like she wished she could disappear into it. Lydia shifted closer to Henry, her hand resting lightly on the arm of the chair, her expression calm but troubled. I stood near the edge of the coffee table, my hands wrapped around each other, my heart thudding in my chest. Henry finally turned to my dad. I cannot respect a man who would put his daughter out in the snow while she is with child. My dad blinked rapidly as if searching for a script, something he could say to paint himself in a better light. His voice came out cracked. Now hang on. I think there has been some misunderstanding. I was reacting to stress. It was Christmas Eve. There was pressure on me. I did not mean it the way she is making it sound. I was concerned about the family, about our reputation, about her well-being. He stumbled through the excuses, stacking them like crooked blocks. None of them made sense. None of them were true. I could see his jaw clenching as he talked, the same way it did when he knew he was lying. Henry held up a hand again. Enough. My dad froze mid-sentence. Henry's gaze dropped briefly to my stomach, and then lifted back to my face. A pregnant woman should never be exposed to hostility or fear in her own home. This is not culture. This is not discipline. This is cruelty. Mom shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting toward my dad as if asking him to say something, anything, to regain control. But before he could, the front door opened sharply. Noah stepped inside. His hair was damp from melting snow, and he looked out of breath, as if he had been rushing. When he saw me standing there in the middle of the room, surrounded by people who barely spoke, his shoulders dropped. His eyes softened. He took a step toward me, then stopped short, like he suddenly remembered he no longer had the right to move close without permission. Avery. His voice cracked. I am so sorry. I felt my pulse falter. The room fell completely silent. I kept my hands pressed to my sides, grounding myself. He swallowed hard. I did not know. I should have called. I should have been there. I let work come first. I let my fear of commitment, my own stubbornness, get in the way. And I hurt you. I know that. But I still love you. I never stopped. My chest tightened. His words landed somewhere deep inside, but the wound was still too fresh, too wide. I held his gaze but stayed where I was. I could not just fall into the arms of someone who had left me behind, even if his leaving had not been cruel. Love was complicated. Pain was not. Before I could respond, a quiet cry came from the hallway. Rachel. She walked in slowly, her eyes red and swollen, her hands trembling slightly. She looked at each face in the room, then stared at Dad with a hollow expression. I am sorry. I cannot stay quiet anymore. Dad stiffened. Rachel, now is not the time. She ignored him completely. Avery needs to know the truth. And so do they. Her voice trembled, but she did not back down. She wrapped her arms around herself, her shoulders shaking. When I was married the first time, years ago, Dad pushed me so hard to keep that marriage alive that I lost my baby. I was barely 2 months along. He told me divorce was a disgrace, that I had to fix the marriage no matter how badly I was being treated. I hid the bruises. I hid everything. And the stress took my pregnancy. She choked on the words. David's face went blank. I felt the room tilt. My stomach turned so sharply I had to take a step back and press a hand against the armchair behind me for support. He never cared about my safety. He cared about our image. And what he did to Avery is exactly what he did to me. Except she survived it. I did not. Henry looked at Rachel with disbelief, then at my dad with something darker: anger, contempt. Lydia covered her mouth, her eyes filling with quiet horror. David shook his head, grasping for any defense. Rachel, you are exaggerating. You do not understand what families are supposed to represent. I did what I had to do to protect this house. Rachel's voice rose, cracking with pain. You protected your reputation, not your children. Silence fell so heavy that I could hear the faint ticking of the clock in the hallway. Then Henry stood. He straightened to his full height, looking almost imposing in our small living room. His voice was calm, but every word carried weight. Avery cannot stay in this house. Not after what I have just heard. Not after what I have witnessed. A toxic environment like this is dangerous for her and dangerous for the baby. She leaves tonight. The room erupted with tension. Mom gasped softly, as if she had not expected anyone to say it aloud. Dad's face lost all its color. Noah looked at me with concern written across every line of his face. Rachel wiped her tears with shaking fingers. I felt the whole world shift beneath my feet. Henry's voice stayed firm. She is not safe here. Not emotionally, not physically. She deserves better, and she is going to have it. I pressed my hand to my belly, the weight of everything crashing down on me all at once. I needed to breathe. I needed to think. I needed to decide what came next. But before I could speak, before I could even inhale fully, Mom turned toward me with a look I had never seen on her face before, a mix of fear, regret, and something close to desperation. And in that moment, I knew whatever she said next was going to change everything again. Mom looked at me with that frightened expression, but before she could get a single word out, I stepped back. I did not have the strength to absorb anything else. Not right then. Not after every secret had just exploded in the middle of the Collins living room. Henry glanced at Lydia, and they both gave me a small, steady nod, as if telling me I did not have to stand alone. I walked out of that house feeling like my legs no longer belonged to me. No one chased me. No one invited me to stay. The whole living room froze behind me like a photograph as I stepped through the doorway. The cold air slapped my face when I reached the porch, but even that felt easier to breathe than the suffocating air inside. Within a few days, the gossip spread faster than the Oregon wind. In Bend, whatever happens in a family on Monday becomes the church whisper by Tuesday. I heard later that Pastor Miller's congregation had crowded around him after Sunday service, whispering about how Patrick Collins kicked his pregnant daughter out on Christmas Eve. They whispered about the Bradfords showing up like a polished storm. They whispered about me standing there in tears and still managing to speak the truth. And then the unexpected happened. A major contract Dad had been chasing for months was abruptly canceled. The company refused to work with a man the community now saw as cruel. His name became the morning coffee topic at the diner off the highway. The handshakes he used to collect so easily disappeared one by one. The pride he held like armor for years began to splinter right over his head. One afternoon, I was in my motel room when a loud pounding slammed against the door, so hard I almost dropped my glass. I looked through the peephole and saw Dad standing in the hallway, his face flushed red with anger. He shouted my name, voice full of rage and threats. I stumbled back out of instinct, wrapping my arms around my stomach. Fear surged through me so quickly I could barely breathe. The motel manager called the police. Deputy Harris arrived faster than I expected. He ordered Dad to leave immediately. He told him if he ever threatened me again, he would face charges. Dad glared at me from down the hall, eyes burning with the kind of fury I had watched my whole childhood. Then he finally turned away, because he had no other choice. When he disappeared around the corner, my knees nearly buckled. Later that same day, another knock sounded. This one was soft. When I opened the door, Henry and Lydia stood there. They carried 2 bags of hot food, thick blankets, and the kind of gentle concern I was not used to receiving from adults. Henry told me they could not let me stay somewhere cold and unprotected. Lydia placed the blanket on my bed like she had done it countless times before. They never asked if I was okay. They simply told me I deserved safety. They told me they were proud of me for speaking the truth. The kindness struck something inside me so deeply, I almost broke down right there. After they left, another knock came, this time quieter, almost hesitant. I knew who it was. Noah stood on the other side with his hands in his coat pockets, his eyes dark and serious in the dim hallway light. He apologized again, this time in a soft voice, like he was afraid he might wound me with volume alone. He said he wanted to try, to make things right, to be part of this child's life. I swallowed hard. I told him I needed time. That love does not snap back together like a piece of broken pottery. He nodded, respecting every word, not pushing, not raising his voice, and somehow, that gentle restraint hurt more than anything else. That night, as I was about to turn off the lamp, my phone lit up with a message from Henry. He wrote that I could not stay in an environment where I was unsafe. He and Lydia wanted me to come to Redmond for a few days. They wanted to help me plan a life that was stable and protected, a life where I could breathe and raise my child without fear. I sat still in the dim room, staring at the bright screen. Outside, snow drifted slowly under the streetlight. I placed one hand over my belly, feeling the slow rise and fall of my own breath. I knew this invitation could be a turning point, a step away from the darkness of the Collins house. But I also knew that if I left Bend, everything would change forever. I sat in the dim motel room for a long time, the glow from the phone screen fading in and out as my thumb hovered over Henry's message. Snow kept tapping softly against the window, a quiet rhythm that matched the rise and fall of my breath. The invitation to come to Redmond sat heavy in my chest. A safe place, a new start, a door opening after so many doors had been slammed shut. By morning, I knew I needed to take one step at a time. The first was getting clarity on how to protect myself from Dad. His anger was unpredictable and had already followed me once to the motel. I could not risk it happening again. I drove to the legal aid office, the same building where I first met Maggie Turner. The air inside felt warm and familiar. Maggie welcomed me into her office with that same calm, steady presence. And as I lowered into the chair across from her, the tension in my shoulders began to ease a little. She listened as I explained the latest threats, the way Dad showed up yelling outside the motel, the way I feared he might go further next time. I told her about Henry's offer too, how part of me wanted to leave Bend entirely, but another part was afraid Dad might come after me if he felt cornered. Maggie folded her hands on her desk and spoke with clarity that felt like someone opening a window in a suffocating room. She said Patrick Collins had absolutely no legal authority over anything related to my pregnancy. He could not access my medical records. He could not demand to be informed of appointments. He could not pressure any clinic or doctor. I was an adult and had full control. She also said if he showed up again at the motel or tried to intimidate me at this work, I could file a harassment report or even ask for a protective order. Hearing those words, hearing them from a professional who knew the law better than anyone in my life, made something inside me loosen for the first time since Christmas Eve. I felt lighter. But the relief was too much too quickly. My vision blurred. My breath shortened. Magic stood instantly, her voice firm and calm as she helped me lean back in the chair. She brought me water and kept talking gently until the room stopped spinning. She insisted I rest for a few minutes before driving anywhere. When I stepped out of the building, Noah was pacing near the parking lot, hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets. The moment he saw me wobble slightly, he rushed forward. "Avery, what happened? You look pale." I told him I just needed air, but he did not believe me. And honestly, I did not blame him. He guided me to his truck instead of my car, and I did not argue. The short drive to the clinic felt like floating through fog. When we got there, the nurses moved quickly. They checked my vitals, kept me warm, and made sure the baby was okay. When I opened my eyes again, the room was hushed. Henry and Lydia were standing near the foot of the bed, both of them with worry etched deep on their faces. Lydia placed a light jacket over me, the soft fabric warm from being held in her hands. Henry set down a bag with food I could smell even before opening it. He asked if I needed anything, if I was comfortable, if I wanted them to step out. Their kindness washed over me in a way that made my chest tighten. I was grateful, deeply grateful. but I also felt fragile, vulnerable. I thanked them both and kept a gentle distance when Noah stepped closer. I told him I was still figuring things out. He nodded, respectful, even though I could see the hope flickering behind his eyes. The next day, Rachel texted asking if I had time to meet her. She chose a quiet little coffee shop off Greenwood Avenue, a place we used to go when we were younger. The room smelled of roasted beans and cinnamon. The air was warm, fogged slightly from the winter coats hung by the door. When she walked in, she looked tired, older than she did 2 days ago, but there was a softness to her expression that I had not seen in years. She sat down across from me and wrapped her hands around her mug. For several moments, she did not say anything. Then she whispered an apology so raw it made my throat burn. She apologized for that Christmas Eve dinner, for not standing up, for letting the fear Dad instilled in both of us swallow her voice. She confessed she had carried guilt for years. She said she watched me go through every harsh word, every judgment, every expectation that weighed me down, and she never defended me because she was still trapped in her own cycle. She looked at me fully then, eyes red. You are breaking something I never could, Avery. You are breaking the pattern. That house took so much from me. Do not let it take any more from you. Her words hit somewhere deep. I reached for her hand, and for the first time in a long while, we simply sat there as sisters, rather than two people surviving under the same shadow. When we stepped outside, snow had begun falling again. Flakes stuck to our hair and coats as we hugged goodbye. Back in my car, I pulled out my phone to check the time. And there it was, a new message from Lydia. When you are ready, we would love to have you come to Redmond this weekend. We want to talk through some options for you and the baby. A fresh start, a real plan. We are here for you. My thumb hovered over the screen as I stared at the words. My breath fogged the glass of the windshield. For the first time in weeks, the idea of a future that did not hurt felt within reach. I typed 3 words, I will come, and as I hit send, something inside me shifted, quiet and certain, as if a new chapter had opened, while the old one finally began to loosen its grip. I drove to Redmond early the next morning, the sun barely rising behind the pine trees as the cold air drifted across them. Highway. The closer I got to the Bradford home, the more the tension in my chest melted into something calmer. When I finally pulled into their driveway, the house stood warm and bright against the winter air, like a place where storms came to rest. The front door opened before I had even stepped out of the car. Lydia walked toward me with that gentle smile that always made my shoulders loosen. Henry followed behind her, waving me in as if I were someone they had known all their lives. Inside, the house smelled of roasted vegetables and fresh bread. The warmth wrapped around me, the kind of warmth that did not demand or judge, just welcomed. During dinner, the 3 of them talked to me like I was already part of something bigger than myself. Lydia gently touched my hand and said they considered me family now, that no matter what happened between me and Noah, I had a place here. Henry looked across the table and said I did not owe anyone marriage or commitment. The only thing that mattered was that I was respected and safe. His words echoed through me in a way I could not fully describe. No one had ever told me that respect mattered more than image. Not in my childhood home. Not once. After we ate, Noah asked if we could talk privately. We stepped outside to the back deck, the cold air settling around us as the last bit of daylight slipped behind the trees. Noah stood a few feet away from me with his hands in his pockets, his breath fogging in the air. I know I lost your trust. He paused, searching for words. I want to be better. I want to show you the kind of man I should have been all along. Not because of the baby, but because I still love you. His voice wavered slightly, and something in me softened but stayed guarded. I told him I was willing to give him a chance, but slowly, with boundaries. I needed to heal on my own terms. He nodded right away, not defensive, not impatient. When I returned to the guest room that night, I found that Lydia had left a folded blanket on the bed and a small lamp turned on for me, casting the room in a warm, golden glow. That simple gesture hit me harder than I expected. Kindness carried a different weight when you had grown up starving for it. 2 weeks later, I found a tiny studio in Redmond, just above a florist shop. The floor creaked when I walked, and the heater rattled at night. But it was mine. Noah helped me move in, carrying boxes with a quiet patience I had not seen in him before. Lydia made soup and brought over extra towels. Henry installed a sturdier lock on my door, without me even asking. Their presence made the little place feel safe in a way I had never felt before. Then the phone rang. Dad. His apology came out strained, threaded through with excuses. He said he lost clients. He said the church was talking. He said he wanted me back home. I told him I wished him well, but I was not returning to that house. Ever. Mom called next, crying softly, begging me to come back. It broke something inside me to hear her cry, but I finally understood that I could not keep sacrificing my peace to save someone who was not ready to save herself. Time passed. My studio became a little nest of safety. I worked, rested, and healed. Noah showed up when he said he would. He kept his distance when I needed space. He walked me to appointments when I felt overwhelmed. Slowly, trust began to grow back in small, steady pieces. One evening, as spring approached, Noah told me he had been offered a position in Washington, a big step forward in his career. He said he would stay in Oregon if I asked. He said he did not want to leave if it meant losing me. I told him I needed time to think. I went home that night and sat on the edge of my bed, one hand resting on my belly as the baby shifted inside me. I thought about Bend. I thought about Dad. I thought about Mom. I thought about every bruise that place had left on my heart. And then I thought about the Bradfords. About their quiet warmth, about how they treated me as if I had always been theirs. I realized that I did not want to rebuild anything in Bend, not even the memory of it. A week later, I told Noah I would go with him, not because I needed to be taken care of, and not because I could not handle life on my own. I chose it because the future we were building felt like stepping into sunlight, after years of living in a house with no windows. Henry and Lydia helped us pack. Rachel sent a long message saying she was proud of me for choosing my own happiness. And on a calm morning in early summer, Noah and I drove north toward a new beginning. Our apartment in Washington was small but bright, with big windows that looked out over a quiet street lined with maple trees. I stood on the balcony that first night, feeling the cool evening air against my skin, while Noah stood a little behind me. Close enough to offer comfort, far enough to let me breathe. I placed a hand over my belly, feeling steady for the first time in years. For the first time, I felt like I had chosen my life rather than inherited it. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you have ever been told you were too much or not enough for your own family, remember this: silence can be power, and truth can be the loudest revenge. Tell me in the comments what integrity means to you and where you are listening from.